About the Sikhs in Shanghai, and the history of the Sikhs. I've got some questions for her I'd like to ask later. So I think really in the interest of time, I'm not going to go on about her academic achievements. You can see them here. But please, the floor is yours, Professor Jackson.
Thank you, and thank you very much to all of you for making me so welcome here. It's a privilege to be here. Sikh policemen were an indelible part of the landscape of Shanghai in the first decades of the 20th century and have attained iconic status in the ways in which this period of the city's past is remembered. They're notorious for their role in the shooting of protesters on the 30th of May 1925, as we all know, but they're also remembered for their routine police work in the streets of Shanghai. By accounting for their presence and their various roles in the governance and policing of the international settlement, this paper demonstrates the importance of the Sikh branch of the Shanghai Municipal Police in the history of the city. It reveals an understudied side of Sikh migration and enriches our understanding of the ways in which the British presence in China was influenced by Indian sub-imperialism, which is a concept I'll discuss a little bit. In doing so, the ways in which the history of China and India intersect are highlighted in an imperial context. From the streets of Shanghai, and not only Shanghai, British power had an Indian face. David Anson and David Killingray, in their landmark volume, Policing the Empire, stressed that colonial policemen were the most visible public symbol of colonial rule, in daily contact with the population and enforcing the codes of law that upheld colonial authority. In the case of Shanghai's Sikh police, this can be taken further, as their emblematic status made them symbolically more significant than the other branches of the police, both to the community they policed and to those who have remembered them since. I argue that they were and they remain symbols of empire in the unique environment of the international settlement, where Britain's formal and informal empires overlapped and intersected. So this is just a kind of atmosphere setting shot, and here's the Sikh setting, directing the traffic. There are lots and lots of, this is a postcard, lots of postcards were produced featuring Sikhs, and they really were used to illustrate what life was like in the international settlement. Sikhs have featured in numerous popular portrayals of Shanghai in the Treaty Port era, from Hergé's Tintin adventure The Blue Lotus, set in 1931, to Kazuo Ishiguro's wartime novel When We Were Orphans. Bruce Lee attacks a Sikh guarding the entrance to the Shanghai public gardens in Jingwumen, Fist of Fury. So there's a very iconic scene where he demands entry to the public gardens and the Sikh denies him, and then a dog walks by, and then Japanese and Chinese servants go in, but eventually Bruce Lee, of course, does what he does best and attacks the Sikhs. So, but this is seen as a way of standing up against British imperialism. In China, negative portrayals of Sikhs carry political resonance due to their role in the May 30th incident. So there are paintings such as this one, Xueji, Blood Sacrifice by Ma Hongdao, depicting the events so as to make, so here are the Sikhs on the side, it's a little difficult perhaps to see, but it gives the impression that it was the Sikhs alone doing the shooting. Clearly it was the British officer who gave the order to shoot, and it was Indian and Chinese police who carried out those orders. But it's obviously easier from a Chinese nationalist perspective to ignore that there were Chinese police involved and focus on the Indians who were shooting. Sikhs are portrayed as the enemy carrying out the dirty work of imperial oppressors. There's also lots of discussion in Chinese popular histories of this role. They feature in museums, particularly in Shanghai. There's a couple of different museums. The main sort of popular museum of this period is in the base of the iconic Oriental Pearl Tower building. There's also another museum of urban security, which is an interesting subject for a museum, which has this diorama with the Sikh policeman here. This is his baton for directing traffic. So these scenes of the Treaty Port era almost always and very frequently include Sikhs. They're known, they were known in Chinese as Hongtou San, So this can be translated as red-headed monkeys or turban number threes, or it's a derogatory term. Clearly the Hong is from the red turban. Asan, maybe from the exclamation I say, a kind of British, slightly old-fashioned term, or Asa as a transliteration. So this is, it's still very much remembered. If I talk to Chinese people, they say, ah yes, the Hong to Asan. It's still a very kind of familiar subject, even though those outside China may be less aware of how much these figures are remembered. So why are they so ubiquitous? Why do they carry so much emblematic power? Why indeed were Sikhs brought to police the settlement at all? Robert Bickers succinctly identified a threefold purpose for the branch: economy, defence and display. So I'll go through those three kind of motivations as to why they were valued by the British. But I'll also discuss the concept that Thomas Metcalfe and Robert Blythe have convincingly argued for, that India exercised sub-imperial control over British interests throughout Asia and beyond the region. Colonial networks extending to India led to Sikhs policing outposts of empire from Shanghai to Ceylon, while the government of India dictated the terms under which they were recruited. So these instructions were not coming from London, they were coming from the British authorities in India. Yet perhaps more significantly, the symbolic power of India in the imaginings of the British Empire by the British and other nationalities has helped secure the position of Sikhs in the history of Shanghai. After Shanghai was opened as a treaty port in 1843, the infrastructure of the small and initially solely British-run settlement was overseen by a committee of roads and jetties. In 1854, this was reformed and the municipal council was created. In the same year, for the first time, a police force was established, and the council was pretty much established to oversee that police force for the protection of the settlement. One European constable was seen as necessary for every 2 Chinese. That's the ideal ratio, because of the high cost of bringing European recruits, but a sort of lack of trust in the Chinese constables. But this was expensive. Even bringing over that many Europeans was expensive. They were paid higher salaries. And so Sikhs offered a sort of halfway point for an economical recruitment. They had less far to travel. They were paid more than Chinese, but less than British recruits. And the idea of recruiting them came quite early on. They were in the Hong Kong police from the 1860s and were first brought over to Shanghai in 1884. Initially recruited locally, so there were some Sikhs already there of their own back. But from 1885, the preferred practice of recruiting Sikhs directly from the Punjab began. So that was seen as ideal to bring Sikhs directly. It was initially perhaps seen as a temporary measure, but they remained on the force for the rest of the existence of the international settlement, so for 60 years. Just to show you the breakdown by hierarchy, this is 1920, so you can see the vast majority of the police on the municipal force were Chinese. The foreign, which meant basically British in the parts of the time, was only around 10% of the force, but they were in positions of supervision and authority. From 1916, there was a small Japanese branch, but the Sikhs were always the second largest branch after the Chinese, and really were held quite an influential position within the police force. As I said, Sikhs were recruited for protection. Chinese were entering the settlement and the vicinity seeking protection from the Sino-French War that was going on in the early 1880s. And so there was a desire to protect the British from this new threat. And this draws on the long tradition of using Indians, and particularly people from Punjab, in defensive roles. They were valued as a martial race, as we heard earlier. This Churchill's idea of people from Punjab as being particularly well suited to martial roles. And so there's a stereotype that was really widely influential. Indian soldiers had been in Shanghai since 1840. They fought in the First Opium War. They were used extensively in the Second Opium War, and certainly in the Taiping Rebellion and the Boxer Wars. So we're going to hear more later about that Boxer War. But so clearly they were used in this kind of much more militarized role. And their policing role should be seen in that context. This was a much more militarized form of policing that we see in imperial contexts. They were used all over. Sorry, thank you. I'll just give you a sense of the range of places where Sikh police were found. So throughout treaty ports in China, these are the kind of major ones where they featured, but also in all of these colonies. So you get the sense of a really major Sikh diaspora. This is just, I'm afraid the picture isn't wonderful quality, but just to give you a sense, this is the Sikh police force in Malaya. So this is a kind of one small part of a much wider picture. So just to expand a little on that militarized background, they 5 minutes. Okay, then I won't elaborate. You can see my paper if you want more information on this. So I'll just mention that there was a proposal to expand the Sikh branch after a major riot in 1905, centered around the mixed court in Shanghai. So this is the mixed court, and this is how the interior of one of the rooms looked after the fire that was starting the riot. So this really made the foreign community in Shanghai feel very threatened, and the response was to propose a dramatic increase in the Sikh branch. They wanted 1,000 seats on the police force. And there would have been essentially a standing army, a small standing army for the settlement authorities. And it was the British authorities in India and the consulate authorities in China that blocked this, saying that no, it's not actually a colony. You cannot have a standing army in this sense. They were army police involved in this reserve unit, which has been described by some as the first kind of SWAT squad of a police force that was brought in to quell riots and disorder. It's just a nice cartoon. Actually was on a Christmas card, bizarrely, in the early 1930s, showing, so these are the members of the reserve unit in the Sikh on the left. So I've talked about economy, I've talked about defence, but what they were valued for, perhaps most highly, was display. They stood out with their height. There was a minimum height requirement for recruitment, and obviously the turbans added to that, and it was a red turban, so that really made them very striking on the streets of Shanghai. They were established as a branch at the same time as the mounted branch was established, and they were seen as skilled horsemen, and so were very involved in that, and were brought out on occasions to display British imperial might. So this was the parade celebrating the coronation of Edward VII, and clearly throughout the British Empire this was a major event. I know there were celebrations in Delhi as well, and you can see how prominent the Sikhs are in this celebration. So they were sort of held forth as really boosting the prestige of the British. It was aimed at the Chinese in Shanghai, but also all the other nationalities. Everyone was competing in Shanghai, but no one could really compete with this symbol of British imperial power. Because their points were known, they did also do a lot of sort of serious police work. Often they're the first people that a crime would be reported to. They were on occasion killed in the course of the action and performing their duties. So in some ways that's not been all that well appreciated. And even their routine work was very hard. You see the kind of chaos of the traffic of Shanghai. It was difficult to regulate the streets of the city. So this is something that the Sikhs were in charge of. That was their major role. So I'm trying to show that they influence all sorts of different aspects of life in the city. This is the Grimoire Nc Temple, which was opened and remains. This is a recent photograph showing that the Sikhs also left a kind of physical mark on Shanghai. It was opened to try, and it was again Indian influence. The government of India suggested that this would be a way of helping to ease tensions within the Sikh community. There were Malwa and Marja factions which conflicted, so it was hoped that this would help provide them with a place to meet and to help quell those problems. It didn't really succeed in doing that, but it was very much a kind of British Indian influence to try and satisfy the need for religious adherence. I also don't have time to go into Indian nationalism, but it really strongly developed among the Sikh and a wider Indian community in Shanghai, dating from as early as 1914, the docking of the Kamagata Maru in Shanghai. So I won't go into this, but you have this strange situation where Sikhs on the police force were both suspected of sedition, as it was seen. There were Gadadhar publications found in the barracks that note that they were housed in military-style barracks. But also they were recruited to the CID and held files on members of the Indian community in Shanghai and spied on them. So you're sort of pitting Indian against Indian in Shanghai. And this really came to the fore most strongly in the Sino-Japanese War, when Indians were very much encouraged by the Japanese and Indian nationalist elements here in India to side against the British, which meant joining the sort of Axis powers and their movement. And there were even two Sikhs who were convicted of war crimes because of their role in the concentration camps in Shanghai. So it's a very mixed picture, this sort of on the one hand held as the symbol of British might and imperialism, but that really changed very much, and this is something that Professor Tumpy has written about as well. So I'll just finish on reminding you of this idea of webs of empires. It's a very Chinese scene, and then you've got the Sikh in the foreground. I think it's a very interesting case study, really, in exploring this idea, which I'm very interested in, of a sort of transnational imperialism, multiple imperialisms working side by side. So, thank you very much.
Thank you. It's a very interesting paper, and we need to have time for some questions. Indeed. Now we stay really with the Sikhs, but we move back to the Boxer Rebellion. And Professor Sheel has come from the east of India, Varanasi, to discuss it. He has a book manuscript with Anand Young that is now approaching publication, so he's a real expert on this subject.
Thank you, Steve, and I first of all, thank ICS for providing me an opportunity to talk about what I am doing recently, and it is about intercultural encounters and construction of knowledge. It's actually an extension from Sikh to non-Sikh soldiers, and I have the paper has emanated from two travelogues which Indian soldiers wrote while they were in China. And name of one is Gadadhar Singh, and the other, is Mahendru Garg. I have their photograph, and it's Gadadhar Singh, it's Mahendru Garg. And this paper is in making for last 1.5 years, and the first, it was presented in NUS, and but here, if we look primarily, these papers in order to explore, intercultural encounters and construction of knowledge about China at the beginning of 20th century. So as compared to ancient and early medieval times, this period has been least studied, in the context of Sino-Indian relationship. In spite of the fact that soldiers, traders, and intellectuals traveled to China and wrote about it, a majority of such records are, however, in regional languages and scattered, and no major attempt has been so far made to put them together to weave what may be called construction of knowledge on China in India. And these travel narratives provide a detailed account of what these travelers observed in China and contributed to formulation of images of China in modern India. Historical images often are implicit in the ways a country formulates its relationship with the other and shape public opinion about the other. As such, their importance cannot be denied. To the extent that these images play a crucial role in the formation of knowledge between two cultures or nations, these writings on China are important tools to comprehend some of the factors shaping the historical development of Sino-Indian relationship during the beginning of early 20th century. So in the above context, the study takes up the writing of two Indian travelers, Thakur Gadadhar Singh and Mahendru Garg. Both were parts of the native regiments under the British Army, which were dispatched to China during 1899-1900 to join the Joint Expeditionary Force to fight the Boxer rebels. And Thakur Gadadhar Singh wrote, his travelogue called, Chin Mein 13 Maas, 13 months in China. And Mahendru Garg wrote Chin Darpan, Chinese Mirror, and both were published in 1901. And so in the present paper, my observation is limited to three specific areas of narrative that shed light on Indian perception of China. We examine first how do these two authors place relationship between India and China in their description. Secondly, how do they interpret culture and rituals of the Chinese? And thirdly, what were the impressions of the Boxers and their movement? And do their writings provide alternative to colonial states' agenda and Westerners' description of Boxer China? So a brief introduction of who was Thakur Gadadhar Singh. Thakur Gadadhar Singh was born in 1869, came from Chandel Rajput family from Kanpur district, and his family had been connected with the British Indian Army. His father, Daryao Singh, served in Bengal's 5th Native Infantry from 1864 to 1870. And Gadadhar Singh, after passing his high school, joined the Bengal's 7th Rajput Regiment at the age of 17. In 1896, he was promoted to the position of Subedar Major, which was the highest position that a native Indian could attain in the Indian Army, in the British Indian Army. So when the Boxer Rebellion broke out in 1900, he accompanied his Rajput regiment to China and spent 13 months there. And besides being a senior native Rajput officer in British Army, he earned name for his writings in Hindi. His travelogue of memoirs, Chin Mein 13 Maas, was published and reviewed by The Advocate, a leading English newspaper in Lucknow, and its May 1st, 1902 edition has been remarked that, in quote, Indian employed in military service are seldom noted for literary ability. They are, as a rule, men of almost no culture. So, indicating, the subaltern nature of, who primarily enter service in the ranks and gradually make their way upwards. The book under review, as coming from an Indian soldier, did not raise high expectations as to its merit. But when its pages were opened, we were very agreeably surprised with what we found therein. It reflects great credit upon the author to have so carefully observed and noted in detail all the passing events in the hurry and scurry of military life in active service, and then to have them published in simple Hindi with his own comment, profusely interspersed. This book is a distinct advance and is likely to leave a permanent mark upon the budding Hindi literature. And actually, Gadadhar Singh is now celebrated as the first, travelogue writer in Hindi in the history of Hindi literature. On the other hand, this Pandit Mahendru Garg was born in 1870 in Mathura, and after his early education in his village, he shifted to Calcutta, shifted to Agra, where he learned English from his local mentor, Lala Harnara and Janaranji Shah, who was interested in literature. And there in Agra, he joined the local Agra Medical College as translator-writer, translating English health books for women in Hindi. But while doing that work, he also joined a diploma course in hospital assistant. And in 1891, he completed his diploma and joined the army as an assistant physician. And as a doctor in the army, he was part of the 7th Rajput Regiment, which went to China. And the book, as Garg says, is based on what he has personally observed, heard, and read in books in China, and consists of all, in quote, must-know subjects related to Chinese people's life, conduct, religion, craft, and trade. So he was writing, essentially for Indian audience, and he was writing on subjects which he thought, would raise, curiosity or, satisfy, their knowledge on China. And he writes that since his acquaintances in India were not highly educated and somewhat illiterate, he chose to write in a very simple language, which could be understood even by women and children. So both Singh and Garg were fellow travelers as part of the Rajput battalion of the British Army, but they had different vocations. One was a soldier and the other was a doctor. And Singh had dabbled with the movement of Arya Samaj and was influenced by his zeal for religious and social reform. And following, Arya Samaj leader Dayanand Saraswati, and frustrated with the decline of Hindu society, as claimed by, Arya Samajis, he emphasized the need in Hindu culture for vigor, self-assertion, and physical courage. So his travelogue echoes many of the such sentiments, and is colored by strong cultural overtones. On the other hand, Garg, a trained doctor, familiar and concerned with the state of affairs in Indian society, aimed to enlighten people about Chinese culture and rituals by presenting a counter-narrative that emphasized similarities of conditions in two ancient and civilized countries due to the facing, the onslaught of the West. And both Singh and Garg, in this sense, are in fact, organic intellectuals in Gramscian sense, projecting shared language, cultural idioms, lifestyle, and binding people together in the project of enlightenment or modernity. So their narratives offer ideological counterforce to the power structure challenging and confronting the coded images from the above. And unlike Gadadhar Singh's travelogue, Garg's book does not give detail of either heroic accounts of war or atrocities of expeditionary forces. He provides details of Chinese life and culture, as he observed during his stay in 10 written chapters. But most importantly, both books start with the feeling of civilizational affinities and dread that the war with foreign powers may subject China to the same kind of fate as India. Garg's first paragraph of the book begins with the statement that the difference between India and China is only the Himalayan mountains, which shields one from the other. If there would have been no Himalayas, it it is very probable that the both countries would have been subject of one king. Their religion, culture and rituals would also have been absolutely the same, as even today many of the customs of Chinese are like Hindus. Gadadhar Singh, in a similar vein, wonders why did a wild uprising erupt in China, which had been peaceful and almost in slumber for past 4,000 years. Were the good times of China heading to be submerged? The zenith of Aryans had already set down. In fact, social and cultural similarities between India and China drew them to view essential unity within the Asian region. And that is an important point because that was the time, when intellectuals all over Asia, were talking about some kind of unity, So very sympathetic to the original social and moral values of the region and admirer of great civilization that these produce, they find their lapse into self-glorification and inability to foresee changes as primary reasons behind their contemporary lack of inertia and dynamism. So what is important, is that they are talking about, decline of society, not so much, the political factors which led to, ruled by the Western, British